Archaeologists are finding many objects and artifacts that indicate that our ancestors believed in alien life. Ancient philosophers and medieval scientists mentioned this more than once. I will tell you about the amazing and unique finds of archaeologists in this video. Hi friend, you are on the Kurtop channel. Giant head in the Aegean. A team of European archaeologists and divers found a giant marble head during an underwater expedition at the site of the Antikythera shipwreck in the Aegean Sea. Researchers have identified the head as a Heracles of the Farnese type. According to them, it may belong to a headless statue of a demigod, which was found in the same place in 1900 during a shipwreck. The statue is currently kept in the National Archaeological Museum of Athens. 2 human teeth were also found embedded in a hard agglomerate with traces of copper genetic material that could be analyzed to determine the sex of the person they belonged to. The researchers also found several other artifacts belonging to the ship, such as bronze, iron, and nails, but these can only be identified using X-rays. All items were handed over for conservation to the Ephorate of Underwater Antiquities of Greece. Early Iron Age swords. The swords were discovered during the construction of a new fire station in the Bavarian city of Indus. These items were funerary. Each sword was buried in a separate grave along with the remains. Swords represent an important transitional stage from the use of bronze to the use of iron in weapons. Both are made of iron, but the earlier one was made in the shape and style of a Bronze Age sword. The later one, made in the same period, had an adapted design to take advantage of the stronger and more stable metal. The swords are 76 and 66 centimeters long and 6 centimeters wide. While the shorter one was probably mainly used as a stabbing weapon in hand-to-hand combat, the longer and heavier one was more suitable as a stabbing weapon that a fighter could wield from above, for example, from a horse. At the Bavarian State Heritage Office in Munich, a team of restorers cleaned the swords using microfine shot blasting technology and examined them more closely. The restorers managed to find traces of a horn on one of the so-called hilt tongues, and the hilt was probably made from this material. 2 blades also contained the remains of a layered linen weave fabric, as well as the remains of a cord that must have been wrapped around it in several places. Presumably, the weapons were wrapped in cloth and buried. The tomb that is not opened. Everyone knows about the Sphinx, but almost no one knows that there is probably a cavity underneath it, closed and even partially concreted. Back in the 1990s, geophysicist Thomas Dobecki conducted an acoustic sounding of the plateau. An anomaly was discovered under the front paws of the Sphinx, an empty chamber with clear rectangular edges. It could not be a natural formation. It was a room or a tomb or something else. This news blew up the world of alternative archaeology. The claims went even further. Supposedly, ancient Egyptian texts mentioned a certain Hall of Chronicles, a place where knowledge left by the gods before the flood is stored, and it could be located right there, under the Sphinx. One step, and we could open the door to the prehistoric past. But instead, there was silence. The Egyptian authorities did not give permission for excavations. The site was declared closed for research. Moreover, according to unconfirmed reports, the shaft at the bottom of the Sphinx was filled with concrete mixture. Just like that. No comment. Why is it not clear? Perhaps not because there is nothing there, but because they know exactly what is there. Oxfordshire mirror. Mirrors are common objects these days, but in ancient times they were considered magical artifacts. This is a bronze Celtic mirror found in Didcot, England. It was created in the 1st century BC and is one of only 18 such finds that have survived to this day. In the Iron Age, such objects were incredibly rare and belonged only to a select few, perhaps priests or noble women. But what was it used for? For beauty, rituals, or perhaps to communicate with the other world. In ancient cultures, mirrors were often considered portals to the other world, and perhaps this mirror also played a role in shamanic rituals. Decorated with exquisite patterns, this artifact remains one of Britain's most mysterious finds. Its true purpose is lost to time, but who knows? Maybe it really did hold something more than just a reflection. Rock crystal reliquary. This reliquary, created in France between 1175 and 1200, is a work of art and religious craftsmanship. It is made of gold and silver and decorated with rock crystal, which adds transparency and lightness. The relics of saints or other valuable relics of great importance to believers could be kept inside. Such reliquaries often became objects of worship. They were exhibited in churches and monasteries where they attracted pilgrims from all over. The design of the reliquary itself is especially interesting. It is made in the form of a miniature building with decorative arches, columns, and small figures of saints, which symbolize the idea of a spiritual temple. The transparent cylinder of rock crystal allowed believers to see the contents, which strengthened their faith in the sanctity of the stored relics. The oldest traces of human life in the Arctic. Modern humans lived in the Arctic 40,000 years ago at the beginning of the late Paleolithic. This was found out by examining the bone remains of animals found in the archaeological complex in the Lower Obe. It is believed that a man of the modern type ended up in Europe and Asia 50–60,000 years ago, but scientists do not know where he lived before and how he passed the Ural Range. For a long time, it was believed that in the period 12–30,000 years ago, the north of western Siberia was covered by a glacier, and therefore it is pointless to look for archaeological traces in this region. In 2020, at the Kushavat site, in the deposits of an ancient stream, a cultural horizon full of bones was discovered, stretching for tens of meters. The stream existed for 20–40,000 years. Now it has shifted down several meters. There are interesting finds that archaeologists periodically date. In particular, 2 deer antlers with traces of processing were found. This is the first discovery in this region, indicating the presence of man in this area 40,000 years ago. To determine the age of the finds, scientists use the method of accelerator mass spectrometry, AMS. This is an ultra-sensitive method of isotopic analysis, in which a careful selection of the atoms of a substance is carried out with isotope counting. It allows you to date organic objects with an accuracy of up to 50 years. This work will allow us to understand the migration routes of people in the Paleolithic era and find out how people settled on the Earth. The complex language of communication in chimpanzees. Chimpanzees use a fairly rich language to communicate, the words of which they are able to combine into sentences. Experts from the Max Planck University of Evolutionary Anthropology in Germany found out. The researchers analyzed almost 5,000 conversation recordings, totaling about 900 hours, between adult chimpanzees in the Thai National Park in Côte d'Ivoire. They were able to isolate 390 unique vocal sequences. Although it was obvious before that the sounds made by chimpanzees carry certain information, such a wide range of vocalizations came as a surprise to scientists. Vocalizations were both single and combined into chains of several and combined in different ways. In total, scientists have identified 12 different types of vocalizations, including grunts, lowing, and whining. The use of vocalizations was influenced by the context. For example, a single grunt of a chimpanzee was published at the sight of food, and a series of grunts, more like a pant, as a sign of a submissive greeting. Although the chimpanzee language is poorer than the human language, it turned out to be much richer and more diverse than previously thought. There are probably more possible combinations and sounds in it than we have been able to identify. Scientists hope that further research into the language of monkeys will help to learn more about the origin of language in humans. Prehistoric Swiss knife. South African archaeologists have found that mid-Stone Age African Howisson's port-type tools, which are functionally very similar to Swiss Army knives, looked almost the same over vast expanses. This indicates that early humans actively exchanged information and communicated with each other. The tools of the Howisson's port industry were produced in huge quantities over 5 millennia and were very perfect for their time. At a later time, there was a degradation of technology, and after some time, a new takeoff. The blades, made 60,000 years ago, were in many respects superior to the stone tools of the late Stone Age, which came only 25,000 years later. Numerous highly versatile blades have been used for many different purposes, including the use as hunting tools, hand-thrown spears, and possibly also a bow and arrow, felling trees and branches, meat, bones, leather dressing, etc. At the same time, all the blades looked very similar and were made according to a uniform pattern throughout the south of the African continent. All this indicates that people of that time must have actively shared the secrets of their manufacture and other information with each other. That is, they were all then socially connected. Unknown creatures. Sometimes archaeologists find images that they cannot explain. They are too strange even for mythology. In one of the temples in the Dendera region, on the remains of reliefs, figures were noticed that stand out from the usual pantheon. They have disproportionately long arms, large eyes, and heads resembling drops of water. They stand in a circle. Above them are symbols of stars, and in the center is a man with raised hands. The inscriptions are erased intentionally. This is not an isolated case. In other temples of Egypt, in Edfu, Abydos, on the walls of underground tombs, there are also figures that do not look like people, animals, or gods. Sometimes they are depicted standing on platforms framed by fire. Sometimes holding a sphere with rays similar to the sun, but clearly technical. One of the most mysterious reliefs, the so-called Dendera lamp, generally looks like something resembling a glass container with a cable from which a snake emerges. Isaac Newton predicted the end of the world. Isaac Newton is one of the greatest minds in history. He changed humanity's understanding of the world by formulating the laws of motion and gravity. But his interests went far beyond physics. He was a mathematician, astronomer, alchemist, and theologian who sought to understand the world in its entirety. One of the most curious discoveries associated with Newton was his predicted date for the end of the world, 2060. He calculated it based on the Bible, or more precisely, the Book of Revelation. Newton believed that the 1260 days indicated there actually meant years. Having counted this period from 800, the time of the founding of the Holy Roman Empire, he arrived at 2060. However, the scientist himself noted that this was just an assumption. Unlike modern scientists who separate science and religion, Newton saw them as a single whole. He believed that the world was structured according to divine laws and tried to discover them. At the same time, he was skeptical of hasty prophecies and warned that incorrect forecasts could discredit the Holy Scriptures. Today, his views seem unusual, but in his time, natural philosophy encompassed not only science, but also the search for divine design in nature. Newton was not only a great physicist, but also a man who sought truth in all its manifestations. A major discovery in Egypt. Archaeologists have discovered an ancient tomb containing 11 sealed burials near Luxor, Egypt in the South Asasif necropolis. The tomb dates back to the Middle Kingdom and likely served as a family burial chamber for several generations during the 12th and early 13th dynasties. The discovery was made possible by a joint expedition of Egyptian and American scientists. It is the first Middle Kingdom burial to be found at South Asasif, expanding our understanding of the necropolis and its connections with the Theban necropolis. Ancient floods destroyed many of the wooden coffins and linen wrappings, but jewelry survived, including amulets and necklaces made of amethyst, agate, and faience. One of the unique items was a fertility figurine made of bluish-green faience, decorated with designs and notches for attaching clay bead hair. A square sacrificial plate with images of symbolic offerings such as a bull's head, bread, and meat, possibly used in rituals, was also found. The remains of 5 women, 2 men, and 3 children were laid in wooden coffins facing north to south. The women's graves had preserved their jewelry, while the children and one of the men were buried without it. Another man was found wearing a necklace of 40 faience beads and an amulet in the form of a hippopotamus's head. This find is especially important in the context of the revival of tourist interest in Egypt, where historical treasures are once again attracting attention. Boar's jaw on the chest. The school grotto is now in Israel. For centuries, shepherds kept goats in this grotto. Excavations began in 1928, and 3 years later, archaeologists found in the layers of the terrace in front of the grotto the skeletons of 10 ancient people, as well as more than 10,000 stone tools belonging to the Middle Paleolithic. The culture is similar to the Neanderthal. 8 male skeletons, 2 presumably female. All but one of the skeletons had bent legs. Intentional burials are suspected, although grave pits are not traceable. One of the iconic finds is 2 drilled shells, one of the oldest jewelry in the world. On the chest of the skeleton of School Phi, between the arms, lay the lower jaw of a large boar. Sometimes they mistakenly write that it is clamped in the hand. Skeletons combine progressive and archaic features. At various times, they were identified as Neanderthals or as mestizos of Neanderthals with sapiens, now usually referred to as anatomically modern humans. School V, male 30, 45 years old. The skull is massive, the forehead is sloping, the brow is large, the face is low and very wide. The chin prominence is well defined, but the chin does not protrude. The man was tall, about 179 centimeters, and had equatorial body proportions. The teeth were badly worn, there was an abscess. In addition, this man suffered from rheumatoid arthritis of the mandibular joint. Finds from school have been repeatedly dated by different methods. Thus, in 1998, the age of about 119,000 years was obtained by the method of thermoluminescence. The paramagnetic resonance method gave dates of 101,000 years. Family mound in Denmark. The remains of 2 of 3 people discovered in 1875 at the Borum Eshoy burial mound in Jutland, Denmark. The finds belong to the late Bronze Age. The remains were buried in oak coffins, which allowed them to be dated by annual rings and are currently stored in the Musgard Museum. The barrow was over 7 meters high and almost 38 meters in diameter. At one time, it was a large monumental building with several internal stone rooms, setting stones, and a stone fence built in steps. Probably it was used for a long time for religious purposes to commemorate the buried, who were highly respected by their fellow tribesmen. There were several burials in the large barrow, including 3 oak coffins, which were probably originally buried here. In the first burial, the oak is dated to approximately 1351 BC. The remains belong to a woman 50-60 years old, a man of the same age, and a young man 20-22 years old. Perhaps they were all relatives. The body of an elderly man is well preserved, even the muscles remained. The study showed that the buried was freshly shaven and even monitored the condition of the nails. The man lay on an ox skin and was covered with a woolen blanket. The buried elderly woman was of small stature and heavy build. Analysis of the skeleton showed that she worked very hard. The young man was dressed in a woolen kilt girded with a leather belt and shod in leather boots. He still has hair, probably cut under the pot. His burial is dated by the rings of the tree from which the coffin was carved to 1345 BC. Artifacts that are not shown. You will be surprised, but not all archaeological finds reach museum display cases. Some disappear even before official documentation. They are not written about in press releases, they are not shown on TV, they are not even included in scientific catalogs. They are either lost or hidden, sometimes by order from above, sometimes to avoid problems, and sometimes because no one wants to explain what it is. In one of the expeditions of the 1970s, which was accidentally mentioned by a former assistant of the Cairo Museum, they were talking about a copper disc that was found. On its surface, there were symbols that could not be compared with any known writing. The object was delivered to storage, and a month later, lost. Later, photographs were found. On them, the disc, and something similar to a map of the starry sky. Only not ours. There is also evidence that in the burials of the 5th dynasty, objects were found made of strange alloys that cannot be analyzed. One of the archaeologists who kept a copy of the report claimed, "This is not bronze, gold, or silver. Something else. Where they are now, no one knows." Someone will say that this is a myth, but then why is access to the storage of the Cairo Museum closed to most researchers? Why can't even Egyptian scientists get there without special permission? These objects could explain a lot, or call too much into question. A dragon egg? Mysterious finds often become the subject of the most daring theories, linking them to aliens, ancient civilizations, or cryptids. Sometimes the desire to solve a mystery leads to wishful thinking, but perhaps this story is truly special. In 2020, an Arkansas resident stumbled upon a strange object while digging a hole for a pool. It had a flattened egg-shaped form and was a little more than half a meter long. The man immediately posted photos on social networks, causing quite a stir. Supporters of the cryptid theories decided that they were looking at a dragon egg, deformed under the pressure of the earth. Indeed, the find resembled either a petrified monster or something unknown, hidden in a stone shell. But there were also skeptics who said that this was just an unusual geological formation. Adding to the mystery was the fact that the owner of the find soon refused to comment on anything and hand over the object for analysis. Whether it was an ancient artifact, a trace of an extraterrestrial civilization, or simply a trick of nature, we can only guess now. 2,000 kilometers to Antarctica. An international team of archaeologists and paleoecologists has confirmed the outstanding skills of Polynesian navigators who were able to reach the southern latitudes of the Pacific Ocean, although they never made it to Antarctica. Research on Enderby Island, located 500 kilometers south of Stewart Island, has shown that the Polynesians briefly inhabited this remote territory. The remains of cultural layers and garbage heaps confirming their presence were found on the island. With the help of radiocarbon analysis, it was possible to accurately date the settlements, around 1250 to 1320 AD, which coincides with the known dates of the colonization of eastern Polynesia. Professor Atul Anderson and Janet Wilmshurst, who led the research, noted that Enderby was the southernmost place of residence of the ancient Polynesians. Further voyages south were virtually impossible due to the cold ocean waters, lack of resources to repair boats, and the risk of hypothermia. These findings highlight that the Polynesians, although outstanding navigators, still had limits to their expeditions.
Aliens in antiquity. The concept of aliens has been around for a very long time. Long before human civilization developed a scientifically based understanding of the cosmos, people around the world looked up into the sky above and wondered what was there. Some ancient societies inhabited these vast, mysterious expanses with gods, beings responsible for the creation of the sun, moon, and stars. In the past, people were also often persecuted for thinking differently. This was the case even in ancient Greece, despite the fact that it was famous for its innovative philosophers. When the philosopher Anaxagoras, who was trying to give a scientific explanation for such seemingly supernatural phenomena for those times as eclipses and rainbows, suggested that the moon is not a god, but a large stone, and the sun is also a stone, but hot. He was arrested and sentenced to death. Anaxagoras also considered the possibility that the moon might be habitable, which was a highly controversial suggestion, contradicting the dominant view of the cosmos as outlined by Plato and Aristotle. The belief in the existence of other worlds was taken up by many philosophers, including Epicurus, who once wrote to the historian Herodotus that there are an unlimited number of cosmoses, and some of them are like ours, and some are not. This belief, however weak, was preserved in ancient Rome. Nothing in the universe is unique, wrote the Roman poet Lucretius, and therefore in other distant spaces there must be other lands inhabited by various tribes of people and breeds of animals. Although Plato and Aristotle lived in a pre-Christian world, their ideas about the universe helped shape the doctrine of the Christian faith. In the Middle Ages, this belief proclaimed that the earth was created by God as the center of the universe. The story of Jesus Christ, who sacrificed himself to forgive the sins of man, established humanity as the most significant of all creations. If other worlds existed, they could not be inhabited. After all, if they existed, it would automatically reduce the significance of the crucifixion. Dominican monk, mathematician, and cosmological theorist Giordano Bruno did not wait until his death to share ideas about the universe. In 3 dialogues published between 1584 and 1591, Bruno suggested that some distant stars might be suns like ours, that planets also revolve around these suns, and finally that some of these planets may be inhabited by life similar to the Earth. These views irritated the church, and in addition, Bruno's interest in magic and the occult led to his arrest in 1592. Refusing to renounce heresy, he was burned at the stake after 7 years of imprisonment and torture. Not all participants in the scientific revolution believed in the existence of aliens. Galileo, a devout Catholic, considered the talk of extraterrestrials blasphemous. British polymath William Whewell opposed the theory of many worlds, defending a special relationship between God and humanity. But oddly enough, his religiously motivated thesis, set forth in an 1853 book called On the Plurality of Worlds, turned out to be more scientifically accurate than the pagan astronomers he criticized. Whewell found an ally in Alfred Russel Wallace, a British naturalist credited with formulating the theory of evolution by natural selection along with Charles Darwin. Our Earth is almost certainly the only habitable planet in our solar system, Wallace wrote in 1903. But even if life exists somewhere in the universe, Wallace was adamant that it could never reach the level of sophistication we find on Earth. Despite the fact that life outside the Earth may well exist, there has never been any evidence of this. Our telescopes do not allow a good look at potentially habitable planets, and radio observation of space does not give anything. The aliens also seem to be in no hurry to contact us.
This situation is known as the Fermi paradox. It can be formulated as follows. Alien civilizations must exist, but why haven't they made contact yet?
2 ancient Roman temples in the Netherlands. The temple complex was found at a clay mining site in the village of Herwen-Hemmeling, located in the eastern province of Gelderland near the German border. In ancient times, the border of the Roman state passed in this area, and therefore scientists were especially surprised by this find. Nearby is Limes, a fortified borderline of the state. Research teams have discovered the remains of at least 2 Roman-era temples that were in use between the 1st and 4th centuries. One of them was of the Gallo-Roman type, had a tiled roof and richly painted walls. A slightly smaller temple stood a few meters away. Among the artifacts found in the ruins were the remains of statues of deities, as well as pits where Roman soldiers lit sacrificial fires. Among the finds were also painted fragments of plaster and tiles with inscriptions. Based on the types of inscriptions on the tiles, archaeologists believe that the temple complex was used by soldiers, since it was the military who made the tiles. In addition, several dozen small stone altars were found where Roman soldiers brought offerings to the gods. Rate this video with your thumb up and write a kind comment under the video. Thanks for your views. Bye everyone.